first speaker today is Adam Swallow, who is the commissioning editor for Business and Economics at Oxford University Press. Adam has been there for a fairly long time now, and his focus is on commissioning books and bringing research to life. Prior to that, he was a communications consultant for Oxford Policy Management and for the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative at Oxford University. We've also got with us Jenny Peebles, who is the Content Commissioning Coordinator at Practical Action Publishing. She commissions books and other short form content for Practical Action's Technical Knowledge Service, Practical Answers, and she has strategic input into 3 highly respected journals: Waterlines, Enterprise Development, and Microfinance and Food Chain. And finally, with us today, we also have Helena Hurd, who is the Global Development and African Studies Editor at Routledge. She commissions a range of textbooks, research monographs, handbooks, and professional titles too. So this session will allow a few minutes for each of our speakers to introduce themselves and beyond what I've already done, and tell us a little bit more about their work, and then we'll open the floor to questions from the audience, which you can ask either verbally, just turn your camera on please and raise your hand to indicate that you want to ask a question, or alternatively, as Sam already mentioned, use the chat function here in the Zoom window. Adam, would you like to take it away?
Absolutely, thank you very much indeed. I was watching the recording of last year's DSA, How to Get Published. So I was trying to come up with some original idea or some question that hadn't been asked or something that was quite prominent. And I thought I'd step back a little bit and put myself in the perspective of one of the researchers and ask what they know about the publishers. You know, which publisher is going to be the best one for them? The fit, we heard that in the journal session. You know, you send your proposals, your papers to the right journal, and a good reason for a desk reject is that it doesn't quite fit. And I think that's the same with books as well. And so we might be looking at different publishers targeting different platforms, electronic publishing, print, obviously, still important. It might be different readerships. So it might be scholars, it might be lecturers, it might be practitioners. You might even have ambitions for public. So you need a publisher with enough scope to be able to get your books out to members of the public. You've also got things to think about the publisher, about their reputation. You know, what are they known for publishing in certain areas? Oxford has a rather famous dictionary, which we're quite proud of. But you've also then got the editor's preferences as well. You know, what are my preferences? Yes, my big title is Business and Economics, but in reality, it's an awful lot of development economics and then development studies and a lot of empirical economics and country studies and such like as well. And so you end up, you need to do a little bit of research to try and approach the right sort of publisher. And you might do that at conferences. You might do that via series editors. You might do that via your peers and such like. And one question that does arise quite a lot is it okay, because I'm not quite sure, but is it okay if I send it to 3 or 4 publishers at the same time? You know, take my pick. And that's a little bit unfair, quite frankly, because if we're genuinely interested, we're going to try and invest in this. We haven't done it for over a year or 2, but it's a story I've told previously. And it's this idea of a conference where you'd walk up to the booth and you and the editor would do a little dance. I've got an idea. Oh, what's your idea? Oh, that sounds interesting. And this little dance is like the start of a relationship over the next year, 2 years, as you write it and as we publish it. And do you want to start your relationships by seeing several people at the same time? No, let's try and find the right one and see whether or not we can develop it. So my general rule, and this is a structure we used last time, my general rule is which publisher. You know, do some research on the publisher as well. And then between us, we also agreed that we'd come up with one pitfall to try and avoid. And for this one, I'm thinking of cases that have arisen over the last year or so, where people have done revised dissertations and they've done some excellent field work. They've got some really good information, something to convey, and they try and situate it within a bigger context. You know, they're trying to expand on the dissertation a bit to turn it into a book, you know, different readership. But in so doing, they're engaging with a bigger topic, a bigger idea. And that isn't really what they're about at all. They're about that original solid piece of research. So as a random example, education reform in Uganda, fantastic. In the context of the global education crisis, whoa, step back a bit. Are you really going to try and engage at that sort of level? The reviewers are going to, pick it apart. Be honest, if it's about education reform in Uganda, that's fascinating. So do that, and you're not going to mislead the editors, you're not going to mislead the reviewers, and ultimately you're not going to mislead your readership. So it's okay to be specific, it's okay to be descriptive, it's okay, nowadays we say, to be discoverable. You're working in this area, everything's online, and be discoverable. So keep your focus.
Thank you, Adam. So next, Helena. Oh, no, sorry, Jenny. My apologies. Jenny, please.
Thanks, Laura. I'm going to go for sharing a screen just with a couple of slides to help. So if, fingers crossed, this works well, we should have just a couple to show you. Can somebody let me know if that's sharing well?
We can see your conference platform screen instead of your presentation. Yeah.
I beg your pardon. Let me try that again. So sorry, everyone. I failed to be getting my slides to work, so let me just freestyle it. And what you're going to hear is somewhat similar to what Adam's said, in that I've picked the same golden rule, but I think it bears repeating, which is to research your publisher. And what I mean by that is to spend some time thinking about what the best fit is for your research. You've spent a lot of time, you've invested a lot into producing your research. Where's it going, and what does a successful publication look like for you? So I think researching your publisher has a twofold benefit. One, it increases your chance of us saying, yes, that's great, that's a fit for our list. And two, it really helps you think about what is a successful publication for you. Because publishing isn't an end in and of itself, it's for a purpose. What are you identifying as critical factors in selecting a publisher? Are you looking, for instance, to join a successful series where you might benefit from being associated with a stable of already successful books? That can be a strong selling point. Are you looking for a publisher who offers a really strong open access program as an established player in that field? Are you looking at a publisher which puts an emphasis on accessibility, reaches the particular audiences that you want to reach? These are all really critical points which help you think about, I've really put a lot of work into this book that I've written, or what I want to write. What's the absolute best platform that it can be on? Who can provide that for me? It's a lot of work producing a book, and I think that that's unavoidable, and all publishers want to do a good job for your work. So putting that thought into the early stages about who to approach, I think does both the publisher and the author a really good service. So for instance, in the context of practical action publishing, it can be helpful for people approaching us to know that we've got a mandate to publish in support of Practical Action, the development charity that we're a part of, in support of their 4 main aims, which are around cities fit for people, resilience that protects, farming that works, and energy that transforms. And that's the kind of context in which we publish. And all publishers will have different strengths and different specialisms, and really targeting, and as Adam says, dancing with one is a really important way of getting you started in that conversation with a publisher. I think a pitfall, and we're following the same format here, one golden rule, one pitfall, is around avoiding an unnecessarily jargony title. And I'll unpack that a little bit. What I mean really is thinking about whether you can succinctly capture what it is that your book is about in a way that doesn't close it off to too many potential audiences. Yes, your research might be about something really quite specific and quite niche, but if you throw a lot of very specialised vocabulary in a title, you can sometimes close down the potential audience when it can have some broader applicability as well. It's a hard balancing act, a niche topic with suggesting accurately that it reaches a broader audience. I also think, and I wasn't in the preceding journal session, but I wanted to reflect a little bit about what can be an effective journal title and what could be an effective book title, because I think these are something quite different. I think book titles, shorter, snappier, more concise, and wouldn't tend to use too many very referential terms or unpack terms in a title, whereas you might well and effectively do that in a journal title. So that's just something bearing in mind, because I know that a lot of people will be looking to create not only journal articles, but also a book from the same research, essentially. And I'm sure we'll touch on that in a lot of more detail in the questions. So to bring it back to something else that Practical Action Publishing does, we publish a number of really quite practically oriented
It seems
we lost Jenny.
Yes, we have. She did indicate that her connection was a little unstable. So perhaps, Helena, I can encourage you to start your introduction, and when Jenny is able to rejoin us, we can return to hers.
Absolutely. Let me see if this works. Can everyone see my screen there?
Yes, that's perfect. I can see it clearly.
Lovely. So yeah, that's me looking a little bit more put together than I am today. As my colleagues did, I'll share a golden rule, or a couple of golden rules and a common pitfall. But before I do, because Adam and Jenny were both talking about which publisher to choose, I thought I would just weigh in on that point, because it can be a little bit of a minefield. And I think that's something that's really important for development scholars to consider in particular, is that development is a very interdisciplinary and particular subject area. And sometimes it can get lost in large portfolios of publishers who don't specialize in development. So what you're seeing here with Adam, Jenny and myself are the three publishers who really care about development and invest in development. We're the ones who come to the conferences, and we're the ones with dedicated lists. And that I'm sort of speaking as someone who's worked in this area for quite a few years now, and shares a lot of frustrations that I think scholars have as well about development being overlooked in academia sometimes. And the connections between different subject areas not always coming through. So I would say pick a publisher who cares about development and who invests in the subject area. And there aren't many of them, and three of them are here. So that's just a small point I wanted to raise off the back of what Adam and Jenny were saying. Golden rule. Write for a particular audience. Don't try and please everyone. I always say, think about an instance where you're in a dinner party and you're in a little cluster of people, and they want to hear about your work. And one of them is a researcher, and one of them is a practitioner, and one of them is someone who has nothing to do with development whatsoever, just a general member of the public. Would you have the same conversation with those three people all at once, or would you have slightly different conversations with those three people? If you would have slightly different conversations with those three people, then you need to be thinking about three different types of output. For practitioners, you might be thinking about a short summary that is freely available online, key takeaways, practical outcomes. For researchers, you might be thinking about converting your PhD thesis into a research monograph. And for a member of the general public, you might want to write an article for a newspaper, or pick some other channel. But it's quite unlikely for you to be able to please all three readers all at once with one book. So my advice is to pick your audience carefully, because if you try to write for too many people, what you'll end up doing is pleasing none of them. You know, the researcher will wander off from the conversation because you've spoken in too general terms and they don't really know what your methodology is and they don't know what your findings are. And you're not really talking to the literature that they know. The member of the general public will sort of maybe nod along happily, but as soon as you ask them to engage more thoroughly, they might wander off as well. So just be aware of who you're writing for, and also be aware that you've always been writing for someone in particular. So this isn't actually a new thing. You've been writing for your supervisors, if you're someone who's coming to the end of the PhD or has recently come to the end of your PhD. And your supervisors are experts and they understand the subject inside out. And that's why it's easier to convert a PhD thesis into a research monograph. They've been teaching you to write for a scholarly audience. And so it's often easier to convert to a research monograph than to try and write for the general public in one fell swoop. That might take a little bit longer as you develop your career. I had a second golden rule, just to bend the rules a little bit, and on the assumption that writing for a particular audience would maybe come up before. I think it is the most important thing. It will shape your book from start to finish, who you're writing for. So this is a sort of secondary point, but have confidence in your own ideas. Don't spend too long at the start on what everyone else has said. A dissertation starts usually with a question that the researcher wants to answer. And then over the course of the dissertation of the thesis, they'll go into what other people have said about it. They'll then lay out their methodology for their research and they'll conduct it and they'll come to their conclusions. For a book, you want to start with your conclusions, start with what you want to say and the contribution that you want to make. Obviously, you want to refer to other research over the course of the book, but you want to start with your voice because that's what people are most interested in. And then over the course of the book, you can evidence your position more thoroughly and build your argument. And then a common pitfall. I find that a lot of early career researchers will spend quite a lot of time focusing on the specific procedures and findings of their research rather than its broader implications. So as I say, you might start off with a methodology section and a lit review. And those are box ticking exercises, which are very important for conducting your doctoral work. Your supervisors want to make sure that you understand what it means to be a good researcher and to be thorough in your approach and your process. But if you think about the other academic books that you've read, they don't go into that much detail about all of that because they don't need to. They don't necessarily need to tick that box. They want to put across the most important and most interesting findings of their research. And so the methodology section will often be somewhat reduced, and the specific findings will be condensed down as well. You don't need pages and pages of tables. It's not going to be particularly interesting to the reader. Think about what you instinctively skip over when you're reading a research book and try to avoid having too many of those sections. And another sort of just finally, to plug, all of the exhibitors have little pages on Hoover, which you should be able to see. So do pop along to those exhibition spaces and you'll be able to find brochures and that sort of thing and contact details for all of us. We're all interested in hearing about new ideas and new book projects. It's the privilege of working in academic publishing is that we get to be amongst the first people who are hearing about new ideas. So don't be shy about contacting us because we are interested. And I should have started with this, but Routledge is the biggest publisher of books related to global development. We publish well in excess of 60 a year and more across other interdisciplinary areas, and for researchers, for practitioners, and for teaching as well. So we try to cover the full range. But if you do have any more questions, obviously let me know. I'm happy to discuss the specifics of your research at any point. But that's it from me just now.
Thank you so much, Helena. Jenny, I see you're back online. So I wondered whether you wanted just a couple more minutes to wrap up your presentation, and then we'll hand over to some questions from the audience.
Thanks. I'm sorry about that. We've been having IT gremlins, unfortunately, in our systems for a couple of days. So thanks for your patience. I just wanted to actually just pick up on one final point, actually, when Helena was talking about approaching any of us with proposals. And I wanted to link that to the point I was making previously, the golden rule, which was researching your publisher. Don't be frightened of showing us that you've researched us and that you know what we do, what our specialism is, and how your book might replicate or move on from, not replicate straightforwardly, but might link to other published works. Having said that, we also like to hear completely fresh ideas. I don't think any commissioning editor does anything other than jump out of the seat when somebody presents something really fresh. So be encouraged to come and have a chat, however, at whatever stage of formation your idea is at. That's something that someone who commissions is always delighted to hear about, an idea of whatever shape or stripe at this point.
Great, thank you very much, Jenny, and thank you to all three of you for sharing both your golden rules and your pitfalls, some very helpful and useful advice there. Now it's time to open the floor to questions. So again, I encourage our audience to turn their cameras on, and you can raise your hand to ask a question, or if not, please do include your questions in the chat. I'll give you a couple of minutes to send those across, or to show your face on the screen, and we'll start the discussion, hopefully. Whilst we wait for those questions to come in, I wondered whether I would just pull apart a couple of golden rules and pitfalls that you presented, because there was one in particular that stood out to me where we said that it was Adam who said it's okay to be specific and make your research very discoverable. But then equally, at the same time, Helena, afterwards, you said, don't forget the broader implications. And though they are subtly different, they could be interpreted to be a little bit in juxtaposition to one another. So I wonder whether you could expand on those a little bit to see how someone might do both those things at the same time successfully.
As I said, it's based, my experience is based on a couple of very specific examples from the last year, where I had proposals in that, were ambitious, had been developed from the dissertation, etc., and had got quite grand titles, as if they were going to grab attention and, this is what it's all about. And one thing about a proposal is, and this was also covered in the journals thing, is can you describe it in what your work in 80 words? It's the sort of description that goes on the back of the book. Stick that at the front of the proposal. Tell us what it's about. Tell us up front. I don't want to go through 6 or 7 pages and then go, oh, that's what it is, and where you've meandered your way through a proposal. Just tell me up front. It makes it so much easier. And what I've found is these grandiose ideas, these, I'm going to copy Helena's now, these broader implications. Yeah, that was all the dressing. That's what some of these proposals were all about. And then when you dig down to it, it's actually based on 2 little case studies that you've undertaken. And how could you extrapolate from that? So I think being aware of the literature, being aware of your contribution to the literature. Again, on the proposal forms, it'll say things like, competition. We don't mean competition. Well, maybe we do. But we mean, what's your contribution to the literature? So if you write in the proposal, oh, there's nothing out there like this, you know, there's never, no. All it takes is one reviewer to come back and say, well, actually, there's this and this, and you've shot it. So being aware of what is out there, being aware of the broader implications is absolutely fine. But if you're writing on this very specialized topic, that's great. That's wonderful. You're being honest about it. And I'm finding, specifically for revised dissertations nowadays, you know, we can drill down into some of these really fascinating topics that just make you stop and think, because I hadn't thought about it like that. And then you can let the reader think of the broader implications and, you know, their own work for it. There'll be people in the audience and people I've published previously who the title of the book, you know, it'll be Poverty Reduction in West Africa. And they're like, is that too limiting? Well, you're not talking about anywhere else. And yes, you've got a couple of international comparisons in there from other places in order to, but that isn't what it's about. It's about this particular subject. So if you say that, people won't be disappointed and they'll find you, and that's how it's discovered. But yeah, I agree. I picked up on that subtle. That's what makes us all different as well, the publishers. So.
I think that actually the 2 points aren't in contradiction to each other. I think Adam's entirely right. What you don't want to receive as an editor is, you know, poverty reduction in West Africa, and actually it's only about Nigeria, or poverty reduction in Africa. That's always happens, and then it's about a specific region, and that's imprecise and problematic. You know, you can't talk to other regions if your research is only about a specific area. But having said that, I think that what I suppose that I meant was that when you're thinking about how to present your work, you need to contextualize it a little bit more for people who aren't necessarily experts in the particular region. So your supervisor has a very advanced level of expertise, and what you don't want to do is speak only and exclusively to the very small handful of people who share that expertise. You want to add a little bit more contextual information, and then at the end you might want to say, well, hey, look, this is something that that I showed in this particular area, but it has implications for elsewhere. You know, how does that change how we think about the subject in other regions, or what does it say about theory more generally? I think one of the problems that occurs for early career researchers is because of the increased level of specialization, you can end up directing yourself in quite a narrow track, which means that the impact of your research could be limited to the researchers who are focusing on a very specific area. And you don't necessarily want that to happen. You want your ideas to work more broadly. So I would say that don't overdress what you're doing, be specific and present it in the best possible way, but equally try to influence thinking in your subject area and think about the sorts of people and the sorts of research that you want to influence.
Great, thank you. I think that definitely adds some nuance that perhaps we didn't get a chance to cover just in the first brief introductions. We've had a couple of questions in the chat. The first speaks to how important is it to be well published in terms of papers when submitting a book proposal. So will an editor consider how well published the person who's submitting that proposal is prior to kind of considering their idea for a book? Adam, do you want to answer that
Yes,
first?
of course. So if you look on the DSA website for the conference last year, my golden piece of advice was about using your knowledge and such like, and who are you and what qualifies you to write this book. So if you're published in some top-ranked journals, that's absolutely fantastic. But if you're recommended to us by your supervisor, who happens to be one of our authors, or if we have a fascinating conversation at a conference, then all of these things go into that initial judgment. Who are you and what qualifies you to write it, and what is it about, sort of thing. So if you can demonstrate that you've got some experience in writing these things, that's absolutely fine. But to be fair, a well-prepared proposal itself is an indication of, you know, a good style of writing as well. And if it grabs me, then that's absolutely fine. So some of my colleagues at the press have a slightly different approach, but you know, I really do work off the networks, you know, series editors, conference conversations like this, people I know, institutes like UNU Wider and ERID from Manchester, and who's involved in those projects. And you know, it's an ongoing dialogue. And nowadays we're looking for more junior people to be part of editor teams and author teams and such like. Any impression of you know, how Oxford publishing in the past might have been represented, you know, of being of Oxford, predominantly white, predominantly male. You know, I need new ideas from around the world, and it's through those networks that some of that quality comes in. And so having having an extensive track record is useful, but it's only one of the factors considered nowadays.
I would absolutely agree with that, and just reiterate that the book proposal is the most important thing from my perspective. If you grab me in the book proposal and you can express your ideas eloquently, and your research is good, then that is the most important thing. I published a really good book a couple of years ago from an early career researcher who just finished her PhD on the Gambia-Senegal border, very, very specific, and that was in the title, and she was confident in her ideas and in expressing them because it was important, and she came from the area, she'd lived her whole life there, and then she'd done this fantastic PhD about that used ideas from her local area and put them into theory in a really interesting way and a completely new and influential way, actually, to start using concepts from within Africa to theorize relationships between countries and between peoples and across borders. These are new ideas, these are interesting ideas. I care much more about that than I would if she had rehashed a whole bunch of ideas that I'd heard before in journal articles. So I think the book proposal is the number one thing. Spend a lot of time on it, craft it well, because it's the packaging to your research.
Thanks for that, Helena.
I'm on.
Oh, go on. Sorry, Jenny, please go on. Yeah.
Just wanted to add, along with the book proposal, for me, actually, what's almost more important is the sample chapters that we ask people to provide, because a journal publication can be a reassurance that, you know, you've been your work's been reviewed and endorsed by peers and you've made it into some top journals. That's fantastic. But for me, I want to see if you can write. I want to know that you can write engagingly. And alongside the proposal, I think the proposal is really complemented by a sample chapter or two, because it shows your promise of what you're promising in the proposal in action, basically. Just wanted to add that little. So I think somebody else is asking also about what we might expect from a proposal package. So let's move on to that. I don't want to preempt it.
Yeah, I was just about to say, both your answers, Helena and Jenny, lead on very nicely to the next questions that we've had, which are very kind of practical in nature. So what would someone need if they wanted to put forward an idea for a book? You've mentioned a book proposal quite a few times already, but what does that specifically entail? There's been questions surrounding, do we need a cover letter, for instance? Do we need even a recommendation letter? Is there a preferred length for the proposal as well? And also, would you have to include kind of a schematic of what your chapters might include broadly, or any sort of materials of that type? So if you could give a bit more detail around that, that would be really helpful.
Yes, I mean, I think Each publisher will approach this slightly differently. So the first step is to go to the publisher's website, look at the materials they have on submission, and follow the recommendations carefully. We do try to make it easy for you, I promise. So it's not too complicated. In my case, I asked for a book proposal that goes into detail about what the book is about, what contribution it's making. It includes the table of contents with chapter abstracts as well, and asks you to explain a bit more about the position of the book within the market, what sort of research is it related to, what other books are out there on a similar topic, and who you want to read it. As I say, very important. So that's the book proposal form. We also ask for a CV, so we have a feeling for where your work has come from and what you've written before, and then a writing sample, which would preferably be a chapter or two from the book itself. If you have the thesis ready and you don't have the book chapters ready, my recommendation would be not to submit the full thesis for peer review. Personally, I feel that when you do that, what you end up with is a lot of peer reviewer feedback that says this still looks like a thesis, which is true, and it's not what the final book will look like. So you might want to select your two strongest chapters from the thesis, the chapters that you expect to change the least. If you don't have a sample chapter ready, sometimes we'll accept a journal article on a related topic within the research, but it really helps to have a sample chapter from the book or from the thesis.
Jenny, what might Practical Action Publishing expect in a book proposal?
So that's very similar to what Helena's covering. I think it will be broadly similar across many publishers. I think personally, I would always want a sample chapter, and like Helena, be cautious about. In fact, I wouldn't send a full thesis out for review as a potential book, because I'd be asking too much, frankly, of the peer reviewer who's going to help me assess that proposal. You have to bear in mind that you also need to be able to demonstrate that you can summarize your content and what it does. And actually the proposal can be a bit of an exercise in that. It helps you to focus your mind about what your book's going to look like, because it's going to look quite different to your finalized thesis. And I think that's a kind of preparatory step that's quite important. So for me, yeah, a sample chapter, at least one, just gives that kind of idea about whether you can adapt something that might have been initially for one purpose for a slightly different one. I was also going to add that I think it does no harm to tell us how you found out about us, whether you have a colleague or a supervisor or another contact who's published with us, or definitely doesn't need to be in the form of a recommendation. Your proposal will be assessed on its own merit, but it can be useful to know, yeah, how you're networked, how you've heard about us, where you kind of fit in to the field of study that you've been working within. And I'll pass over to Adam, because I think I'm now being a bit repetitious.
Jenny, could I just ask a question on that? How would you say that to the editor that you're approaching? Someone mentioned a cover letter. Would that be the type of place where you put that information into, or would that be all included within the book proposal itself?
So for me, I would think a covering letter unnecessarily formal. This is speaking for Practical Action Publishing. An approach to me as an email, completely sufficient. It can be worth mentioning it in the covering email so that I have the kind of framing right up at the front, but it can also be helpful putting it in the proposal itself, knowing that it's going to be me as the editor looking at it, but also an external peer reviewer. So to give the context both in the email and the proposal, I think is helpful.
Great, thank you. And thank you to Adam too for linking. If you're in the chat, Adam has put in a really useful link about an example of what might be needed for a publishing proposal that's available on our website. But also, Adam, would you like to add anything else?
Yeah, there's subtle differences between them, but we've got the main headings. It's a synopsis, it's the title, it's who you are, your affiliation, it's the table of contents, it's the abstracts, it's the contribution to the literature, it's the practicalities, the extent. What sort of word count? Are we talking a little book or a massive book? Anything complicated about it? Artwork, figures, data appendix, something like that we might need to know, or all the artwork can only be in color, etc. So some of the practical things are good to know about up front. Do you have access to, do you have requirements for open access, etc.? If we know about these things up front, we can go into it with our eyes open. And so yes, in the on the link I gave, it's on the DSA website. It is specific to the DSA book series, but the headings are generic more broadly. And that's a quick link for people to reference. And for me, a couple of sample chapters really useful. I think the thing here, and it's unfair, but I think the thing here is, if you have written lots of books, you're a known quantity, and so you can get away with quite a brief proposal. You're probably well connected anyway. You might not need a lot of sample chapters because we know what we're going to get. The less experienced you are, probably the more we're going to need, but not the dissertation. I don't like having journal articles as samples because a journal article is written for 7,000 words, and a chapter, you don't necessarily have that constraint, and it fits within a bigger frame as well. So I normally ask for 2 or 3 chapters where possible, but there's no harm in sending us a proposal in the first instance, because if I'm genuinely interested, I'm not going to send a proposal out for reviewers unless I think we've got the best possible chance, and that might involve having accompanying materials with it. So I'll give feedback on the initial proposal, yes, no, revise and resubmit, and then I'll get to the point where we're all happy and I'm quite confident that we'll be able to go ahead.
Thank you for that. I think that is definitely very helpful, and some of our audience have echoed that in the comments as well. Whilst we wait for a few more questions to come in, just a reminder that this session finishes in about 15 minutes at 3:15. So there's still plenty of time to submit your questions if you so want to do that. Please use the chat, or also feel free to raise your hand and ask them verbally as well. But in the meantime, whilst we get some more questions through, I wondered whether we can perhaps move this kind of process forward. So I've submitted my book proposal following the instructions you've just given me. What happens next? What might I expect? You seem to be interested as an editor in my proposal. What are the next stages I should expect, and how should I best prepare for those?
In the proposal guidelines on the link that I sent you, there is then a paragraph at the bottom of it that describes all the stages and processes as well. But for my part, if I'm happy with it, it goes for review. I need a minimum of 2 supportive reviews. A question that often arises, and I've alluded to it earlier, is do you approach multiple publishers? The idea is preferably not, because we might send it out to the same people to review, and then that's a bit embarrassing, and they said, I've already seen this, or it might be suitable for one publisher, but not for another publisher, and that's the reviewers making that judgment. That doesn't really quite square it either. Let's suppose we get 2 supportive reviews, which at the moment can take anything from 6 to 8 weeks coming through. It was tough last year trying to, wasn't it? And so if that's okay, I'll anonymize them. I'll extract anything I need. I'll send them back to you and invite you to respond. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What do you want to engage with, etc. It might be at that stage we have to reject, that we haven't got the support. But if we're supportive and I get your response, I collate the paperwork, the proposal, cover notes I prepare, the reviews, your response to the reviews, the costings, profit and loss information, everything that, is this actually going to work? Are we going to sell copies and or get rich off it? And then I send that to an internal publishing meeting. Heads of academic, publishing, marketing, sales, etc. Is the title good enough? Is it descriptive? Is it too jargon? Is it too ambitious? And then those comments get flushed out there. And then because we're a university press, it then goes to an academic board at the University of Oxford, chaired by the Vice-Chancellor. They're called the delegates, and there's about 18 of them. covering a wide range of subject areas, and they're the ones that need to approve both the content and the whole process that's being followed. And if that's successful and they approve, they meet every 2 weeks during term time. If they approve, then I write back and say, congratulations, we can offer you a publishing agreement. And then it's down to you, write the book.
Great. Is that similar for
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, so Routledge is broadly the same with a couple of differences. As Adam says, when we get the initial proposal, it'll be yes, it's ready for peer review. No, it needs a little bit more work. Can you resubmit? Can you add some material? Can you revise something? Or no, it's not ready for peer review. Once the peer review process has happened, the peer reviewers will say more or less the same. Yes, this is excellent and needs no changes. No, this is poor. Or most commonly, yes, this is great work. I suggest X or Y. And then we discuss that feedback, and the author has an opportunity to rebut or to change or to tweak. And then it goes to our editorial board, which is similar to Adam's in that it's comprised of editorial, marketing and sales, and we talk about the sort of publishing aspects of things. The difference in our case is that we don't have an academic board that then subsequently approves and considers the work. And, I think there are advantages and disadvantages of that system, but what it does offer Routledge is an objective distance. We're unconnected with a particular university. We go on the basis of peer reviewer feedback from around the world, from global specialists, and we use that to inform our decision making. Whereas Adam would, say the advantage is that we're connected to Oxford University and the prestige of Oxford University. Personally, I like the objectivity that comes from being removed from a particular university affiliation. But that's something to consider again when you're selecting your publisher. Otherwise, the approval process is the same. And then it's over to you to write the book once we've got all the paperwork sorted out. And then once the book is written and submitted, we discuss it and consider if any changes are needed at that point, or if we need clarification or, better images or things like that. And we discuss things like the blurb that goes on the back of the book and the cover and that sort of thing. And then it goes off to our production team. And that process takes about 5 months. I would say at Routledge, from initial conversation to contract, it can be as quick as a couple of months. And then once we have the finished manuscript, depending on the length of the book, it can be published in 4 to 7 months, just to give a general picture of the processes.
Jenny, do you have anything to add, or shall I invite the next question forward?
Only briefly just to say that I guess practical action publishing is a third case. So you've had a university press, an academic press, and then a press that's a wholly owned part of practical action. Only just to say that yes, these processes are similar for us. No, we don't have a press committee or anything sitting at a higher level. It's a more of an internal decision based on the peer review comments. But just to say that at practical action, because we're part of a development organisation, we can often call upon colleagues within the wider organisation to help with comments on proposals because they're practice focused. So if it's a particularly practice focused proposal, for instance, we could call on one of our colleagues who's an energy specialist to give us really up to date on the ground view on its contribution to kind of the more practice end of the field. And then similarly, it's then up to you to write the book. I would say there's probably an interim process there, which is between us saying, great, let's publish your work, and you writing it. There's a bit of a discussion about the contract terms. And all I would say, not obviously the scope to go into that in detail, but ask your publisher if you have any questions about any of the contents of that contract, because it can be a little bit intimidating if you're not used to the kind of standard terms and conditions that form part of the deal between you and the person who's agreed to publish your book.
Great, that's excellent. Thank you for that, Jenny. We have someone who'd like to ask a question verbally. So Josephine Winkler, if you'd like to unmute and go ahead and ask your question, please.
Yes. First of all, thank you for the insights. I don't know how the process in the UK works, but I would have to publish my thesis in the original form first. So for example, I would go open access with my university library. And I was asking myself if that open access version would be an impediment to actually publishing a revised version with your, with the publishers.
Jenny, would you like to take that question first?
Sure. Probably the answer is it depends. I would never think about a published thesis and a book based on a thesis to be exactly the same thing. I think there's really quite a lot of work in between the two. So it would probably be a discussion about the degree to which you're going to change or even build on it. It wouldn't be the case that you'd publish your dissertation open access and we would be desperate to publish it at the same time in a print form, because you're eating into the sales essentially. And although we are a not-for-profit publisher like everybody else, we need to be able to recoup the costs that we expend on a publishing deal for your book. That's probably not a very informative answer, but it wouldn't having a thesis available open access wouldn't preclude me considering a book based on it. I think it would depend on what else you were going to do with it and how you were going to adapt it into something that was slightly different.
I think, yeah, Jenny makes some good points there. Publishers invest a lot of money in bringing a book to publication. There was some independent research done recently for over a whole bunch of university presses in America, which put the cost of the investment for the publisher in each research book at something like $30,000. So for a publisher, we need to think, well, if we're spending that money, can we be guaranteed that enough people are going to buy the book to justify the investment in the book? And if something is available for free and it's available for £20, £30, £80, the odds are that you're going to go for the free one. But this is a fairly common issue, and most universities will have some sort of system or embargo period to allow researchers to also publish their work in a book. It might be that they remove the thesis from their repository for a certain amount of time. There are strategies in place, and they will certainly have had the question before if it's a policy that they have at the university. So I would say consult with them. I think we'd all be, we would all say that it would be a factor that we needed to consider when we're considering the book proposal. But as Jenny says, if it is sufficiently different, then that helps.
I agree. And Oxford University Press is a department of the university. So we're not at arm's length in that sense. We're an actual department and a registered charity. Woo! I mean, if you're going to go for it, just do it all in one go. But because of that, we often have conversations and briefings from the Bodleian Library on dissertations and such like. And there are policies that across Oxford, but also regarding OUP. And it really is down to editors' discretion whether or not we're actually going to make any money off it and how sufficiently different it is. But it's a very live conversation, especially with UKRI and REF and open access discussions going forward, and the viability of the monograph as an item in its own right, and who pays for it and who funds it, etc. So I think it's the add value that the publishers bring to it, the revised version that we bring to it, and it becomes the matter of record You know, the dissertation is your evidence of your research skills. The book is the thing that people want to go away and read.
Great, thank you for your question, Josephine, and also for all the answers from the panel. We probably have time for one question before we finish, which is regarding what are your preferred types in each of your different publishing houses. The preferred type of book you like to publish. Is it a book, or is it a research monograph, or perhaps more of an edited style of book, or an anthology, or perhaps all of those? And I'll ask you to respond briefly to that question, but also if you want to sum up any final thoughts, then please do that as well. I'm just mindful of time.
Ooh, good question. Well, Routledge publishes all types of book across across global development. So we publish research monographs, we publish student textbooks, we publish practitioner books, we publish open access books. So it's a very difficult one to say. It's sort of like, which of your children do you love the most? I think that any one of those types of books can be really exciting to work on. And really interesting. And one of the great things about being a books publisher is that every day you're coming into the virtual office with to find brand new ideas. And, you know, I think every day you're surprised by those. So this week I'm reviewing a textbook on international relations, which is an introduction to international relations, but entirely from African scholars and from an African perspective. And that's really interesting and it's really exciting. And what they haven't tried to do is say, this is, you know, this is an Africa textbook. They've tried to say this is an introduction to international relations, which can work anywhere, but it comes from Africa and comes from African perspectives because that's what's been missing. So yes, we're also going to include the global literature on international relations because we're not going to put ourselves in a corner. So that's a really exciting book. Equally, you know, I mentioned the Senegal Gambia book. I loved working on that one. Really fantastic research, quite specific, but made me think in different ways. And then we had a book that published last year, which was more of a general reader book on rethinking aid. And that was written by really influential practitioner, and it's had a really good general readership. So all of those books excite me in different ways. I suppose that what is most interesting and new about what's happening with the publishing landscape is the open access transformations in the last few years. And that's exciting as a format of publishing because it means that anyone in the world can read your research and read your work. So as a publisher, that's fantastic to be working on because there are no barriers to access and readership. So that's exciting.
Thanks.
I fudged the question by saying all of my children are my favorite.
Thanks, Helena. Adam, would you like to add anything?
So OUP is the largest university press, and we publish in every format around the world, from higher education, English language teaching, etc. Specifically to me, authored monographs, edited monographs, Oxford handbooks make up the core of what I do. I'm not afraid of an edited volume if they're well done, but as a policy generally, I think some publishers stepped away from edited volumes. They were seen as lesser quality or something. But I think with the rise of things like Oxford Scholarship Online and the online platforms that we've got, where people can go in and just read an individual chapter, as if, you know, from an economics perspective, that's what people have been doing in journals forever. And it was a natural transition. So I'm not afraid of an edited volume as long as the editors actually put the work into it and bring it together and, you know, not just bookend it with an introduction and a conclusion. Authored volumes, absolutely fine. Graduate texts, I do a few of those as well. But specifically, I think for this audience, yeah, authored volumes or co-authored volumes make up the bread and butter of what we do. And then at the top end, we've got the flagship, which are the Oxford handbooks. which we've done recently. The Ethiopia one, the South Africa one's coming out. The Economy of South Africa is coming out awfully soon, and I've got another 7 under contract from Malawi to Mauritius. So
sounds exciting. Jenny, how about at Practical Action Publishing?
I guess probably the bulk of what we do is authored volumes, research monographs. Also, I guess probably distinct from Routledge and OUP, kind of more on the manual, more practical oriented books. We also have a number of publishing partnerships and publish on behalf of some of the humanitarian standards partners, so more firmly within the sort of humanitarian practice world. However, more important for us, I guess, because we are part of Practical Action, is content that aligns with our change ambition. So in those areas that I talked about earlier around resilience, it's really about climate crisis, really around urban work, around agroecology. I'm more interested in the content than what form it takes in that sense. I've not been at Practical Action Publishing very long, but I haven't seen a lot of edited collections come through us. I'm seeing more and more co-authored things that might formerly have been edited collections, where the lead editors decide actually everyone deserves equal billing. And that's actually quite interesting. That's about to happen with a monograph about young people living with uncertainty in a lot of different contexts. So I'm doing what Helena did and saying everything welcome, basically, but really it's the content. Does it kind of help us to underpin Practical Action's aims and really contribute to new conversations and development? We bill ourselves as partnering with the brightest minds to produce the freshest development perspectives. So anything that does that or contributes to that is something that we're interested in.
Thank you once again to Adam, Helena, and Jenny for your time today, and to the audience as well for being here.